Hello there. My name is Castor, and this is where my coven meets at night. We practice our spells, brew potions, and study tomes like the one before me. So many stories fill its pages, new ones appearing out of thin air when I'm not looking. I can read you one if you'd like. Here's one of my favorites. It's called Grimdrake Academy, written by Liam and Ritzy. It tells the story of a young teacher at a magical school, struggling to prove that there's magic inside us all. If you like this story and want to hear more, you can support our Coven on Patreon and hear new stories early, as well as some bonus stories only seen there. Now, get comfortable and let's begin. It was the rain that first drew Milla to Grimdrake Academy. Not the sight of it, and not the sound of it either. That was all too common for her. It was the smell, the history she collected every time a raindrop tapped on her head. There were faint notes of students staying up far too late before their transfiguration exam, flashes of a great feast to commemorate the dueling club's new trophy, memories of starry nights foretelling countless wonders. The school is old, centuries and centuries now. When taking the mountain pass, one feels that age as time seems to reverse with every step taken. There are no cities near Grimdrake Academy. No car exhaust can be heard. No blimp can soar above the surrounding peaks. The castle stands as a reminder of some world that should have been forgotten by now. Every day it stands above the morning haze, an act of defiance. While it hid its age well in the past, some upkeep was needed. The roof tiles adorning many towers were starting to fall, their bright purple paint now a mushy gray. There was more moss than mortar between the bricks, vines slithering their way up any surface it could wrap around. Rain pooled in the well-trodden paths students take as they dash from one side of campus to the other, praying to make it on time. Milla takes one herself up to her own classroom, lesson plans clutched in hand. The fastest route she'd found in her year of teaching was to skip the main staircases entirely and take a detour through the library. The stairs can get so crowded in the morning, and now she can catch up on any tabloid gossip she may have missed. Care of Magical Creatures was on the third floor of the East Wing, tucked between advanced familiar training and demonic summoning. Just after the spiral staircase, second door on the left. The classroom was quite sizable given the small attendance. The seats sloped downwards in rows, the desks curving to focus on the teacher's podium. Despite the efficiency of the seating, there were all manner of specimens to latch onto during a lecture. Bones of any dozen creatures were strung floor to ceiling, as well as painted renditions of larger creatures who would need their own castle wing to house. The most eye-catching for any newcomer would be the ominous head of a basilisk some feet above the chalkboard. Though dead and stuffed for decades, its piercing glare had not been dulled a day. Milla stood a bit off to the side of her podium, a chained sphinx by her side. They're much shorter than many would think, with yellow fur that turns green in its mane. Its dark eyes slowly scanned the classroom, the terrified faces of the students reflected on the lens. "What's smart as a dog, cries like a man, and is cut like a tree," the sphinx growled. "Hungry today, aren't you?" Milla replied, as she glanced at the table beside her. Alongside maces, scrolls, and live gerbils were large piles of meat stacked up high. Milla walks from the creature to a plate of light pink flesh, fairly fatty. First two parts are the animal, chicken's out of the question, and cows don't cry like a man. She didn't wait for an answer, raising her hand in the air. "Helidos, grab me a pork chop." Milla's ratty blue bird ruffled his feathers after a long nap in the rafters. Raising his wings, he made it to the table in a single long arc. The edges of the raw meat started to chill as his talons pierced it, though he didn't hold on to it for long. The sphinx snatched the pork chop out of the air, Helidos throwing it to him from a good distance away. He was a smart bird, and knew he'd never want to get close to those teeth. Most people wouldn't think Helidos was a phoenix, the way they imagined them brighter than the sun. Compared to their fiery feathers, his muted blues made him look more like a pigeon than a god. "Sphinxes are typically docile creatures," Milla continued, walking up to her podium. "They only attack when their riddles aren't answered correctly." The sounds of ripping echoed more in the students' heads. None of this ever bothered Professor Milla, though one would think she'd faint at the sight of blood. She was a newcomer to Grimdrake Academy, prim and proper, Her hair was always bundled into two bushy pigtails right next to her head. She cleaned up the remaining slabs of meat with the same smile she wiped off her chalkboard and waved goodbye to her students with. Milla would say it's a smile of satisfaction. One student approached as the others left, a distinguished child with spiraled hair. "How can I help you, Miss Titlesmith?" Milla asked, putting her cleaning rag down. "Nothing much. Just a small question I hope you could answer," she chirped. "Are these live demonstrations truly necessary for this class? They're a bit boorish, don't you think?" Ame Titlesmith came from a long line of moon witches. Very powerful magic for a powerful family. Most people in this school cowered to her wishes. Milla, however, had a different tactic. Throwing open the windows, she let the crisp mountain air fill her classroom. "Do you think rain is dangerous, Miss Titlesmith?" she questioned. "Not usually, unless you're in a monsoon," Ame replied after a moment of thinking. "And my bird." Milla held her left arm out, letting Helios grip onto the leather glove she wore. "He's not very assuming at all, right?" "Right," Ame responded once more, starting to get a bit annoyed. Milla pet Helios down his back and he started to coo. "Helios, why don't you fly around a little, show off your wingspan?" As the bird lifted off, Ame started to see where Milla's example was heading. The ice bird's magic mixed with the cold air, creating trails of ice behind him. As he looped and spun through the room, the air started to harden into pieces of hail. It rained down, breaking glass and throwing books off shelves. The Sphinx, unable to come up with a new riddle due to the noise, rears back and starts to growl. "That's good, you can take a rest now," Milla called out. Helios let down on top of a shelf, squeezing in between two books. Milla grabbed a slab of beef and moved to the Sphinx. "As you can see, unassuming things can have major consequences. It's our job as the mediums between creatures and humans to understand that," she said. Ame clutched her books to her chest, shaking a little from the cold. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. See you next week, then." With that, the girl turned and left. Milla watched the courtyard below as Ame joined the crisscross lines with her fellow students, rushing to their next classes. There was a purpose to their movements, more than just an urge to get their favorite seat in class. "Ever miss those days?" The voice echoed from the doorway, Milla and the Sphinx turning to it. A bell jingled in the creature's overgrown mane. "You never stop being a student," Milla replied. "You just lose the robes." "That's the spirit," Professor Wilder chuckled, raising a kerchief to his nose. He was the man Milla was brought on to assist, as his bones had grown too brittle for the cold morning air. It didn't help that his many adventures to study magical beasts had left him with too few toes and fingers. The Sphinx bounded up to him, less of a cruel beast and more of a newborn. Wilder scratched under its chin. He knew all the best petting spots. "Hope Cleo treated you well." "I think he knew better than to make me look bad in front of the class," Milla joked. "Also, he wouldn't have gotten treats if he did." Milla packed up her papers and strolled out with Professor Wilder. As they reached the stairs, a low voice pulled them back. "Miss Nieves, stay right there." "Looks like someone's in trouble," Wilder chuckled. Milla was already fearing that as she struggled to look behind her. A shadow overcame her, and the voice spoke once more. "This is very important, and I'm not going to wait around much longer." Slowly opening her eyes, she gazed up at the irritated face of Professor Chio. She was a tall woman with pointed ears and sharply cut red hair. To Milla, the green-eyed stare she saw now reminded her of the classroom's basilisk head. "I swear these new hires," Chio muttered under her breath while popping her staff off the ground. "Follow me, please. The headmaster wishes to speak with you." There was a central tower that all of Grimdrake was built out from, standing watch over the land. This is where Milla headed to meet the headmaster, walking across the exposed bridge. The height was dizzying, the courtyard outside her classroom obscured by mist. A gargoyle awaited them at the bridge's end, its back fused into the tower wall. "Come on then," Chio said, as she placed a hand in one of the statue's outstretched claws. Milla grabbed on too, and within seconds they were jerked forwards into the stone wall. Instead of a sharp head pain, Milla's body felt cold, as if she was swimming through mud, air not coming to her. It was over almost as fast as it started, Milla stumbling onto a velvet rug. As she caught her breath, a hand adorned with rings and bracelets reached out to her. "Sorry if that way doesn't agree with you, Professor," Headmaster Zeit said. "The stairs are slower, but more reliable." Milla accepted her hand, her grip assuring. She met Zeit's eyes hidden behind dark glasses. They sparkled like stars. "It's quite all right, really," Milla chirped. She knew this meeting had to be important. She couldn't mess this up. "How would you describe your first year at Grimdrake? Enjoyable, I hope." Zeit turned around, her smile hidden by her pinstripe coat. She wore it on her shoulders, the collar jutting out like wings. "Answer honestly. I wouldn't be a good headmaster if I wanted a yes, ma'am." "Just perfect. Don't worry there." Milla felt her clammy hands. "I loved being here. Love the office space. Students are great." "Tell me about your students," Zeit interrupted. She reached her desk now, a great circular window behind her. Clock hands ticked on it, each second thrumming through Milla's bones. Zeit motioned to a chair nearby. "Please sit. No reason to be nervous." Oh, why'd she have to say that, Milla thought, as she inched over, finding a plush armchair to sink her. Oh, why'd she have to say that, Milla thought, as she inched over, sinking into plush cushions. I don't really know where to start with the students. They're great. Haven't had any troublemakers or anyone failing. All smooth sailing." Zeit leans back in her chair, folding her arms. "If you're uncomfortable with Professor Chio listening in, she can leave for this," Zeit said. In truth, Milla had forgotten the professor was even in the room with them. "No, it's okay." She took a breath. I don't know what to say, really. I love teaching at Grimdrake. I love the students especially. Even if something frightens or confuses them, they want to be in my class. I try my best to help whenever I can and make sure their time here is the best it can be." A smile cracked across Zeit's face, quickly disappearing as a new person exited the wall. He had a grin of his own, the orange curls around it like sunbeams. A strap coiled around his wrist, attaching to the briefcase in his left hand and turning it into a part of his body. "Took me a bit to get here. Had to sign some autographs. Professor Merriweather was indeed a celebrity, one known for his advances in magitech. A lot of eyes were driven to Grimdrake when it was announced he would be taking up the empty charms teacher spot. You must be that animal girl I've heard about," he said, looking at Milla. "Care of magical creatures teacher. Yes," she replied, the answer falling on deaf ears. "You've told her the news already, haven't you?" Merriweather asked Zeit. "That must be why she looks so depressed. Sorry about this, chap." Milla was more confused than ever, checking if the bags under her eyes were more noticeable than she thought. "No, Professor Merriweather, I hadn't. And I hope that in the future, you'd wait until you know what's going on before interjecting," Zeit said. "My mistake, Headmaster. I'll follow your lead." Merriweather chose a leather couch to stretch out on. Zeit took in a heavy breath before returning her gaze to Milla. With all the changes happening in the world right now, Grimdrake Academy is planning to add new courses in magitech production. This means we need to find space for them and... She took a pause. "That means classes need to be cut. Attendance in our magical creatures classes have been declining, so it just makes sense to..." "But you can't!" Milla bolted up from her seat. "Students, most of them are in the middle of their degrees. And Professor Wilder, this has been his home for decades. Where would he go?" "We've already prepared for those things. Please don't worry. You were called here because you're still researching your paper, correct?" Zeit asked. "You were called here because you're still researching your paper, correct?" Zeit asked. "Oh yes, on lily pad slugs and their conductive properties." Milla couldn't care less about her paper right now, as her eyes darted over to the man, lounging like a dragon sleeping on stolen gold. "How close are you to completing it? If you're nearly done, you're more than welcome to stay here and finish," Zeit said. "All due respect, Headmaster, that's not why I want to be at Grimdrake," Milla stated, clasping her hands together. "I want to teach people that magical creatures aren't to be feared. They're more than monsters or potion ingredients. If Grimdrake's removing these classes, imagine how it is out there." Zeit kept her eyes on Milla, sitting up and placing her elbows on the desk. Milla's heart beat, a mix of stress and passion. "I see your point. We've got to figure out some balance here, but that still requires us to make cuts." Zeit thought a moment longer. "At the end of every school year, we host the Beltane Magics Fair in the main courtyard. Teachers are more than welcome to present any of their findings alongside the students' projects. Professor Merriweather will be showing off a brand new invention of his there." "I can show it to you if you'd like," Merriweather exclaimed, perking up at the mention of his name. That's quite all right," Zeit responded, once more moving back to Milla. "You could present your work. If people take an interest, I'd be more than happy to keep you on board here at Grimdrake." "Oh, thank you, Headmaster. I'm gonna go work on it now. Make sure I'll be done in time." Milla raced towards the door, stopping a few feet from the stone wall she entered through. "Which way to the stairs?" Milla flung the door into her office open, sending all her notes clipped to clotheslines flying. A few settled in a large glass tank on her desk. Its walls were frosty, cables attached to its side. Milla reached into the water with some salad tongs, saving whatever paper she could. She dried and hung them back up on the strings that crisscrossed through the closet she was gifted for an office. One could walk the length of the space in 2 strides, so Milla had to use every inch of it to its fullest. Pillows replaced her chair and rugs for comfortable seating. Bookshelves on the longest walls also stored canned food and jams for late-night snacking. Everything in the cramped space served several functions. "Helios, we have to get on this," Milla called to her familiar. He was perched on the closet door, refusing to come any closer. "The students are counting on this experiment going well, and I can't do it without you." She ruffled through her desk drawers, all filled to the brim with trinkets and bits of trash. After writing another note to get a garbage can for her office, she finally found what she was looking for. It was a short wooden stick made of magnolia and a leather grip. A bit of twine dangled from its base. Milla cinched the strap around her wrist before flicking her wand and lifting a few lily pad slugs out of the tank. She set them on a small towel with a scale underneath. About half a pound each, she wrote down, before picking one up with her hands. It was rounded flat like a disc that turned bluish-green on the edges, its skin sticking ever so slightly to hers. Part of that was the cold, the constant cold of a lily pad slug. One on its own was nowhere close to Helios' freezing touch. But a group of slugs can make even the warmest weathers feel like a blizzard. They consume the heat from the surroundings in a process similar to photosynthesis. Some thought they subsisted solely off heat alone. Milla moved the slugs to a copper plate and pulled a crunchy stick from the bookshelf. "Come on, Helios, your favorite," she said, waving it in his direction. He turned his beak up. "It's not that bad, and I don't think I can take another battery from engineering without getting caught," Milla pleaded. Helios knew he shouldn't take the chance, but those treats were just too good. He landed on a metal rod hanging from the ceiling, taking the food from Milla's outstretched hand. As he swallowed it whole, Milla attached jumper cables to the perch. They were connected to the metal plate the slugs lay on. "Attempt 338, Milla spoke as she started a new note page. "Start whenever you're ready, okay?" After a moment, Helios spread his wings and started to flap slowly. His perch swung back and forth, ice sticking to the walls as his energy flowed out. Milla was focused on the slugs. The edges of their bodies turned down and spread out. They're feeding. Voltage levels holding steady, subjects reacting as usual. Milla finished her note-taking and signaled for Helios to stop sending energy. "Now for the tough part," she said, while dragging a battery out from under the desk. Helios grabbed the pen Milla set down, ready to write any important information for her. This was the most dangerous part of the experiment, as Milla needed to attach the jumper cables from the perch to the battery. She had already electrocuted herself a few times, nothing serious yet. This time was a success, and now they just needed to wait and see if the slug's built-up energy would transfer. A few hours passed, and nothing happened. This was the cycle that Milla had been in for the whole year she taught at Grimdrake. Incremental progress made between any number of things. She expected that her research would take a few years at least, and now she has less than a month. She went on like this for the next 2 weeks, but the batteries stayed quite empty. As she struggled to keep her eyes open after a night of grading papers, Milla stretched and attempted to use her desk to pop her back. "Let's take a quick walk, Helios. Been in here too long." Grimdrake looked mysterious in the rain, but powerful in the sun. The exposed stone seemed almost white, pillars reaching up to hold the entire structure staying perfectly upright. Milla had a favorite spot next to these things, a small pond close to the library and far from popular places like the dining hall or sports fields. A few fish breaking through the water and the rustling of leaves above are the noises that Milla usually hears, though today was a bit different. Students bustled about, setting up stands and tents all over campus grounds. Beltane was upon them. The Beltane Fair of Arts and Magic had been held on the castle grounds for centuries and marked the start of summer. It was always a sight to behold, due in large part to the bonfire that would replace the sun come nightfall. Long sticks of birch were handed out to those attending, on which they would write their hopes for the next year. It would then be added to the pyre to release those wishes into the world. It was a comforting thought for magic to work that way, Milla mused. Maybe it worked on an older way of magic making, something rooted in the world's power than any matter of equations or studies. She stroked Helios' chin as he cooed beside her. She stroked Helios' chin as he rested beside her. Yes, it had to be that. an ever-present sort of thing that had to be felt instead of seen. "Professor, is that you?" Milla opened her eyes to see Kurt Leibar, one of her best students, coming up to her with a scroll clutched in hand. A werewolf by birth, as his mother was a practiced magimorph. Maybe that's why she could feel the care he put into his assignments, or maybe he's just really good at school. "I was just reading your paper. Great work as always," she replied. "Have you gotten a bit lost?" "No, I'm actually going around to get signatures," he said, holding up the scroll and a pen. "Would you sign?" "What's it for?" she asked, rolling open the paper. "It's a petition to keep Professor Merriweather as a full-time teacher. He'll be such a big help to all the students." A snake wrapped around Milla's brain. "What makes you say that?" she asked. "Well, he's offered to use his connections and find us all apprenticeships if he stays round," Kurt went on. "And he's done so much, too. Have you read his books?" "No, I haven't had the time. Could you please excuse me, Kurt?" She didn't wait for an answer, needing a place where she could exist without no one's knowledge. It would be night before Milla considered returning to her research. She sat on a windowsill, looking down at the main courtyard. The moon was so bright, a calming glow that reflected like diamonds off the fountain's water. There was a care to the school's construction, a purpose of its builders that she couldn't feel until now. She was on the precipice, her soul attempting to create a map of Grimdrake she could return to once she was no longer one of its tutors. Milla did not feel the conscious urge to leave that window, but she found herself wandering all the same. As she rounded the corner to Wilder's office, she saw a yellow light shoot from the doorway. Someone was in there, waiting for her. She inched nearer and heard a familiar snarky tone. Merriweather stood on top of Wilder's desk, holding one side of a tape measure up to the ceiling and measuring the distance. "What do you think you're doing?" Milla asked, Merriweather twisting his head around. "Oh, you. Forgot you were, well, still here." He chuckled a bit, Milla unsure if he laughed out of self-consciousness or irritation. "Would that make it better? Professor Wilder hasn't retired yet, and you haven't got the job." Merriweather narrowed his eyes at Milla. "Do you seriously think you have a chance? What gives you that confidence?" Merriweather slides off the desk and opens Milla's closet door. He pokes his head in, looking at the organized mess inside. "Oh dear, looks like rats." Milla grabs the handle, pulling it shut. "That's my office. Keep out of there," Milla exclaimed. "Really? You work in there? I wouldn't wish such a cramped space on my worst enemy." He clutches the briefcase still tied to his wrist. Milla started feeling a twitch in her eye, failing to grasp how this man could possibly be this cruel and dismissive. Milla started feeling a twitch in her eye, failing to grasp how this man could possibly be this cruel and dismissive. Are you just incapable of thinking about other people? Seriously, is it a spell cast on you, or were you born like this? What, am I supposed to name every ant I step on too? Merriweather laughed, placing the tape measure in his pocket. You shouldn't be here. Schools are for learning, not whatever ego boost you're looking for, Milla said. Merriweather pointed a finger at her. First off, I don't need a child like you telling me what I'm here for. And second, he flings open her closet door, pointing to her failures. If that's any indication, you don't belong here either. Merriweather walks in, slapping the paper strings out of his way. He stoops down to look at the aquarium, wincing at the sight. I mean, seriously, what is this? This looks like a toddler's plaything, not an academic experiment. What's your project then, if it's so much better than mine? Merriweather got a glint in his eyes as he clicks open his case. Well, if you must know. He rummages in his case deep, past whatever physical bounds it should have before he pulls out a wooden contraption. It was about the size of a textbook, but a bit thicker. Several copper dials were flicked this way and that. A large one pointed straight up. Merriweather twisted a wheel on the back, extending the machine's antenna. I'll be showing off my weather-changing machine. Merriweather strutted about with it in hand, as if he was selling an expensive vase. With this, the world becomes ours. Picture it. Sprawling cities in the harshest tundra, water for all in the desert, and it's thanks to me. You really don't care about other people, do you? Milla was at a loss, hearing something so stupid. Merriweather sneered at her comment. And why should I? If I was meant to care, they wouldn't be groveling at my feet. He bumped into Milla as he headed for the door, cradling the weather machine in his arms. It was a care he never seemed to pass to anyone with a heart. Milla felt a flame deep in her core, and it rushed through her body and set her brain ablaze. She needed to do something right then and there. Fast as the wind, she wrapped her hands around the wooden box. "Helios, to me!" she screamed, shaking the bird from his slumber. He flew out, seeing his partner struggle against the enemy. "What are you doing, you stupid girl?" Merryweather shouted. "Blast him now!" Milla turned to Helios. He cawed and opened up his wings, flapping forward and shooting out a tornado of icy wind. Merryweather's body slammed into the bookshelf behind him, scrolls and skulls tumbling down and knocking dust onto his silk shoulders. Milla ran, not sure where she's going or what her plan was. She just had to do something. Stopping at an open window, she raised the infernal machine above her head. She was ready to throw it down, break it on the mossy stones below, and be done with all this. But that's not her, is it? As her head started to cool, she knew she couldn't bring herself to do it. What kind of person would she be if she started breaking things every time she didn't get her way? She brought the box down onto the windowsill, letting her hands fall to her side. "There you are," Merryweather panted, fumbling around the corner with his hand at his side. Milla stepped back from the weather generator, hands clasped. "I didn't do anything to it. I couldn't," she said. "That's because you don't have what it takes," Merryweather growled. He grabbed the machine, stuffing it back into his briefcase. She watched him go before slumping to the ground like a dropped doll. Helios nested against her as he attempted to give some comfort. She pet the top of his head, the chilled feathers soothing. It was the only thing she could do now. The cycle continued as it had, though Milla found it hard to keep spinning. Her students started to whisper there was a death in her family. And perhaps there was, just not a person or a pet. It was her spirit who had died, however briefly. She had dreamed of the time where Grimdrake could be her home, where she could sing its praises and nourish the students there, but it was as meaningless as any other thought one has, without the ability to shape it within reality. The rains of late spring gave way to blooming flowers, perfect weather for a festival. Hundreds of new faces from all over flooded the castle's weathered stones. Each booth showed off a wondrous new spell or tool, all begging for someone's attention. There were several teachers among the students, such as the professor of arts and witchcraft, Roscoe Underbow. He studied magical flora in school and applied it to his love of painting, creating living artworks. The canvas he painted on was alive, a rare vined plant that he grew into a rectangular shape. Last year, he broke a new record with a piece that ran for 47 seconds before the artwork looped to the beginning. Milla found it quite hard to stand out amongst them, as she had completely forgotten about decorations for her booth. So far, it did not seem to turn people away, but she feared the oncoming judges. Janet Belladonna was the first she spotted, the steeple point of her hat far above the others' heads. She was the Dean of Cosmic Affairs and Mystic Studies, and oversaw most of Milla's department. Thrace Thorogood was next, the Dean of Humanities and Pleasantries. He was an old soul in a young body, carrying a much older urn in his arms. The final witch was the Dean of Practical Magics at Grimdrake, her red hair sending shivers down Milla's spine. "Hello, Deans. Milla wanted to continue, but was cut off by Professor Chio lifting her hand. "No pleasantries, please." She didn't just cut with her gesture, but with her tone of voice. "Just start the presentation." Milla stood frozen. "The girl barely opened her mouth and you jumped down her throat. One wonders if you were some sort of leech in a past life, the way you drank the color from her face." Thorogood's outburst gave Milla a moment to catch her breath, the light of his smile eclipsed by Chio's rage-filled expression. She placed the lily pad slug onto the copper plate in front of the group and turned her machine on. "In an attempt to understand the conductive properties of the lily pad slug, I'm seeing if the creature can be used as a middleman between an energy source and a battery. These slugs live completely off energy, so we should be able to siphon it from them." "And can we?" Chio asked, gesturing to the battery that sat on Milla's table. "Is that full of all this slug energy?" "Not much at the moment. If I was given a bit more time, I would." Chio held up her hand again. "If it didn't work, then why are you here instead of keeping your failure a secret?" she spat. "Because I had to," Milla stated. "Even a failure is important." "Not if it's boring." Chio turned away, Professor Belladonna gliding behind her. Only Thorogood stayed a moment more. "Don't look so down," he said. "There's always next year." Milla didn't know how to put her grief into words, just giving a nod and letting him leave. She closed down her booth early, vanishing her equipment with a wave of her wand. Helios landed down on the empty booth as Milla picked up the aquarium. "Come on, guys," she said. "Let's go find some food and watch the big finale." Milla felt better than she imagined now that the moment had passed. Fair food definitely kept her mind off things. After her fourth candied apple, she looked for a seat in the amphitheater surrounding the unlit bonfire. People were already filtering in, eagerly awaiting Merryweather's new invention. She saw quite a few familiar faces among the students. Many hadn't been in her class. She'd just seen them in the hallway or the courtyard outside her window. They had no name to her, no memories made together, or anything that would cause her to cry. She did anyway, because they were people too. Beautiful people who wanted to learn and understand the world. She wished so badly to help them along that journey, show them a new way of seeing. Maybe that'll come again one day. Professor? Milla dried her eyes, looking up to the cold face of Ame Titlesmith. She held out a piece of birch wood just for Milla. "Oh, thank you. Sorry I didn't see you earlier," Milla replied, taking the log. "Yeah, okay." Ame started to move away, but couldn't find it in her to leave. "Are you okay, Professor? You usually don't cry this much." "That was due to the spores in the air of that class, and I remember you crying just as hard," Milla chuckled, before letting her face fall down again. "I won't see you next year, I'm sad to say. Professor Merryweather will be taking over the whole magical creature's wing." Ame's face soured at that. "Really? That loser? I swear he gets everything handed to him and he never lifts a finger," she complained. "Well, I'm not sure you should be complaining to me about another faculty member like this," Milla replied. "I'm happy to hear you'd want me to keep teaching you." "Yeah, sure. That's what I meant," Ame said with a small wave, heading down the steps toward the fire pit. Milla couldn't help but have a little smile on her face after that. Soon everyone had filtered in and been given their stick of birch, ready for the show to begin. In a small flash of light, Merryweather appeared on stage. "Great to see everyone here tonight," he announced, a smirk wide across his face. He wore a collared cloak, which Milla had never seen anyone with good taste wear before. It was fastened with a large ruby and bejeweled on all its edges. The interior was embroidered with dazzling stars. "I have been brought before you to showcase the next step in our advancement as a society. Behold!" He unveiled his weather machine from underneath his cloak, the crowd in awe. "With this machine, there is no place on the face of our world that can stay untamed. With the turn of this dial, any one of us can become masters of the weather. You will no longer have to pray for snow in the middle of summer." He turned the dial, a bolt of light flicking into the air. Clouds started to swirl just above them all before sending tiny snowflakes down to greet the crowd. "Rain in the middle of the desert," Merryweather continued, changing the clouds to reflect his words. "And now, I'll light our bonfire with a bolt of lightning." He turned the dial, but was greeted with nothing. Merryweather wasn't sure what to do now, so he just kept messing with the other buttons on the face of the machine. "Are you... Come on now," he muttered before a bolt of lightning struck the stage in front of him. The professors were quick to cast shielding spells before waves upon waves of lightning struck down upon everyone. Students and guests fled the scene, looking for any cover they could. Milla struggled to move against the crowd, clutching her aquarium close. She lifted her arm, calling for Helios to lift her from the crowd. She knew what had to be done. "Give it to me, Merryweather. I'll stop this," Milla cried out as she landed on the stage. "No, never," he screamed over the rising wind. "This is supposed to be my moment, the one that starts the rest of my life. You won't come one step closer." He clutched the wooden box to his chest as a bolt of lightning burst through the shield, striking towards them. The pair felt the heat, knew they were the target, but it had just vanished. Milla looked down into her aquarium to see little bodies glowing inside its walls, excited to be in a climate they found very comfortable. "That's it!" Everything clicked in Milla's head. Lily pad slugs can't pass energy along. They absorb it all directly. She called over to Merryweather now. "Give me the machine. I know what to do." "Tell me. Let me do it. They need to see me do it," he cried. "Then I guess you're coming with. Helios." Milla made a spinning motion with her finger. "Race around. Make some air." He cooed before spreading his wings wide, then flying round and round in circles. He started a bit slow before picking up, turning faster, gathering wind behind him. Merryweather felt the effects of Helios's flying before Milla, his cape getting whipped up around him before his feet followed. They were launched into the air, barreling past the magic shields into the eye of the storm. Each time the lightning spewed forth, Milla's slugs ate it back up. Black clouds surrounded them now, the castle Milla found so much hope in, now hidden from view. "You get a signal yet?" Milla cried across the distance to Merryweather. He scrambled in the box's insides, trying to find what could possibly be the problem. "It's the battery, there's no charge." There was an irony here that Milla could taste, but it was not the time to comment on it. These slugs in her arms, these creatures had the secret to their success. She pulled them out, vanishing the aquarium with her wand. She held them in the air with a charm. Lilypad slugs spread out during a storm to get the most of a lightning strike, she called as she spread the spell out. She made a ring around her and Merryweather, the energy of the slugs bouncing between their bodies. "We can use them to make a hot spot in the storm and break it apart. Help me hold them in place." Merryweather drew his wand, helping balance Milla's spell and push the slugs out further. The next lightning bolt was the storm's last. It hit the slugs, the energy dashing through all of them before climbing up into the pair's wands. The explosion that came from it could only have been called beautiful. Rings of pink and orange flew through the air, cutting through the black clouds and sending them far away. Milla couldn't remember the feeling of being exploded, just found the drop back to Earth quite peaceful as she got a few minutes of rest. She awoke to a sharp pain in her stomach, as if she was hit by a wooden club. "She'll be all right," Professor Chio called out. Her healing magic was feared all over the school, as any injury could be healed with one strike of her staff. She did not care for any comments that her method of healing could, in fact, also injure. As Milla got her bearings once more, she could see the absolute destruction the storm wrought. The trees that lined the grounds of the castle laid completely flat, splinters of wood as tall as Milla sticking up from the dirt. Holes had been carved into Grimdrake's walls, and one student's poor fair booth found itself resting on top of the bell tower. Professor Zeit stood at the top of the amphitheater, the shapes of the deans behind her. As Milla made her way up the steps behind Chio, she overheard their heated discussion. "He should be sacked immediately," Professor Thorogood exclaimed. "Back in my day, you'd suffer much worse after a scandal like this." Merryweather crawled back as he sat on the ground, his briefcase once more in his arms. "This is still your day," a voice escaped between Professor Belladonna's lips, though you choose not to accept it. "I do not see sufficient evidence for expulsion at this moment. What say you?" Her eyes slid over to Zeit. "Why don't we hear a personal testimony first, now that she's awake?" They all looked to Milla now, who suddenly felt much smaller. "Professor Milla, who got rid of that storm?" "Not me, that's for sure," she said. "Not him either. It was these?" Zeit turned to Milla, a glass tank in her arms. There they were, safe and sound. "The lily-pad slugs, yes. We'd be in a bad spot without them," she answered. "I should say so. One last question. Do you think he knows how that weather machine works?" Milla looked down at Merryweather now, his once perfect hair a mess of twigs and leaves. "No, I don't," she said. "Headmaster, this is ridiculous," Chio interjected. "She's losing her job. She'll say anything to—" Chio quieted when met with Zeit's stare. She flicked her hand, pulling Merryweather's briefcase right to it. Zeit unlatched the briefcase, holding it upside down. A large woman Milla had never seen before fell out from it, wrenches and screwdrivers coming with. "Hello, Marguerite." "Of course it's you," the woman snarled, wiping oil from her hands off on her dark apron. "Wasn't enough to throw me to the gutter, you had to take my son, too." Milla had never been more confused. "Headmaster, who is—" "Marguerite Fletcher," Zeit replied. "She graduated alongside me at Night Vale Academy. Gifted mind, but a bit too reckless when it came to choosing her test subjects." "None of you understand what progress means," Marguerite cried out. "There's always a sacrifice. Why don't you get that?" "I understand. Truly I do," Zeit said. "That's why you lost your right to practice magic. Do you really want that to happen to your son, too?" The woman really seemed to think that over. "What do you want so this all goes away?" "I want to never hear of you or your son stepping foot on a school campus again," Zeit commanded. "If he wants to learn on his own, be my guest. But if I hear of you making these machines or pulling these charades again, you will know what it means to cross me." Marguerite bowed her head down. "If I must," she growled before grabbing Merryweather's ear. "Come on, we have work to do," he cried out as she dragged him away. "Are you sure it's right to keep them together, Headmaster?" Milla asked. "It can't be good for Merryweather, being stuck under someone like that." "I've been thinking about that too. Though I want to intervene, that change must come from Merryweather himself to make it last," she said. "Now, I believe we had a deal." "Yes, I know. I'll start cleaning my office out right away." Milla turned to leave, but Zeit put a hand on her shoulder. "I'm afraid you've got this all wrong, my dear," she said. "With Merryweather gone, there's no need for anyone else to pack their bags." In fact, Zeit reached into her coat and pulled out a scroll. "I think we'd be fools not to keep you here as a full-time professor." Milla finally heard the words she thought would never be said. Her own response was a deep hug. Yes, of course, Headmaster. I've never wanted anything more. The skies above Grimdrake seemed to welcome her. Soft shades of yellow painting the castle to look like a dream. This was the place Milla always saw, a place so singular in the world that there was never a need to be anywhere else. She was, truly, at home. A wonderful story, don't you think? If you haven't had your fill, there's more on our Patreon right now. Thank you to everyone who came to listen, and please come back when you want to hear a nice, cozy story.